We do have quite a few conferees today, so I would ask that you be as concise as possible, and if you can, not duplicate previous testimony. I know that's difficult at times, but very much appreciated. Thank you, Amelia.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. House Concurrent Resolution number 5011, as amended by the House Committee on Taxation, is a proposition to amend Section 1 of Article 11 of the Kansas Constitution relating to property taxation. The resolution proposes that on and after January 1 of 2027, the taxable valuation of 3 subclasses of property would be determined based on the lesser of either their fair market value or the average fair market value. The 3 subclasses are real property used for residential purposes, real property used for commercial and industrial purposes, and buildings and other improvements on land devoted to agricultural use, and mobile homes classified as personal property. The legislature by law may establish the number of years to use in determining the average fair market value and further provide for valuation adjustments for new construction, changes in property use, property that is listed or escaped or omitted property, and changes to the description of the land. The proposed amendment would be submitted to the electors at the November 2025 general election, and the House adopted the resolution on March 7 on a vote of 117 to 4. And I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions on the legislation? So, Amelia, I'll ask real quick. I think there's a difference between what the Senate passed and this, in the sense that the Senate is triggered and ready to go. This actually takes a trailer bill. Is that correct?
From the perspective of, with respect to this House concurrent resolution, it would seem to me that the determination of how many years to use for an average would be necessary in order to implement it.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Amelia. Committee, our first conferee is Dave Traubert. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Dave Traubert, CEO of Kansas Policy Institute. We support HCR 5011 because we believe it would blunt the rate of increase on property taxes. We also like that this one does not change the appraisal process. As we understand it, it discusses the change in the taxable assessed value. So you would still have regular appraised values, and the taxable assessed value is a separate matter. So it doesn't.
I'll clarify with Eddie and Amelia, but I went out and read it, and it is the appraised value, not the assessed value.
Well, it discusses taxable assessed. In any event, then if it doesn't, then that's something that we would like to see changed, so that it is, you would take appraisal times 11.5%, and that number, that factor, could not increase by more than whatever limit you would choose. So whether it's there or needs to be changed, that would be an enhancement that I think would take care of a lot of concerns about having this kind of a limitation. We think it's necessary. I mean, I don't have to tell you, you've all heard it when you go door knocking. We've had outrageous valuation increases in a lot of cases. Over the last 3 years, the average increase on statewide average on existing property is north of 30%. And there's a table in my testimony that indicates some of the examples, like Cherokee County, the average is 45%. Lynn County is 66. Others are in the high 20s, low 30s. The question to me is not one of whether these assessed valuations are accurate. It's an affordability issue. Even if your home goes up 30% over 3 years, your income probably didn't. So it becomes much more difficult to pay those taxes as opposed to something that would be more limited. The revenue neutral process is working. I'll go into that in greater detail on my testimony on 2396, but let me just say that this was never intended as kind of a cure-all. It was step one. It was really driven by a taxpayer's strong desire for transparency and accountability. Initially, we had a little over 50% of all the taxing authorities in the state choosing to stay at or below revenue neutral. That's now up to 62%. There's also another 13% of taxing authorities that are imposing increases of less than 4%. So it's working for a great many number of entities. While we support 5011, we really have some serious concerns about some of the elements, and we hope the committee would take a look at. First of all, it's for an unspecified number of years. That will create a lot of confusion at the ballot box. You're kind of saying, trust me, the legislature will decide the right number. I think voters would like to know what that number would be. Delaying the implementation to 27 is another concern, where the Senate bill would go into effect in 2026. And it's also not universally applicable. It hits the two biggest categories, but there can be burden shifts if it doesn't go to everywhere. Also in my testimony, I provided a analysis of 3 different scenarios to show how this bill would compare with the Senate version of the fixed cap. Scenario 1, we assumed a 6% annual increase, and that's because the 24 increase was 6.25% on existing homes. So we assume 6% increase each year on a home that was valued at $200,000 in 2024, and did the tax calculation on a fixed rate of 150 mils each year. What we find there is that under current law, that homeowner would pay about $48,000 with those variables. HCR 5011 would take that down to about $46,000, but the SCR 1603 would take it down to about $42,000. Obviously, if the appraised values are higher, these numbers are going to be worse. So if on a 10% annual increase, that homeowner would pay $60,000 over 10 years versus $55,000 in the House bill and $43,000 in the Senate bill. So there are some real big differences, and the higher the valuation, the larger those differences become. You would really need to get consistently below 4% in order for them to become comparable, and for the House bill to be better than the Senate bill, it would have to be under 3% a year. So it really comes down to how much of a tax increase you want to allow. I also think the fixed rate would be easier to understand, and predictability is important. So with that, we hope you would entertain some of those ideas, and I'll be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Dave. Committee questions? Senator Owen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here and sharing your thoughts, Dave. So in your opinion, do you feel like HCR 5011 is a property tax decrease for the taxpayers?
Is it an increase for the taxpayers?
Is it a decrease?
Is it a
Does this
decrease?
decrease property taxes for the taxpayers?
It would not reduce taxes. It would limit the rate of increase. Because by limiting the increase in the assessed valuation, you might get a 5% tax increase instead of a 10 or a 15% tax increase on an individual piece of property. It doesn't reduce the tax collections in any way that a city or county could take in.
Senator Owens.
Thank you. HCR 5011 is a rolling average based on whatever number of years are set, and so it's not ultimately, when you come with the appraised value, and this is the taxable valuation is specifically what is addressed here, not the assessed value, but the actual taxable valuation. Initially, at least the way that I see it initially, if we were to take, say, the previous 6 years, then sure, it would drop that valuation down initially.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing in here, correct me if I'm wrong, that stops any future significant increases that will simply push up that average over 6 years.
That's right. If you look at scenario 2 in my testimony, you can see that there is a consistent gap where 5011 charges a higher tax than would occur under 1603 with a 3% fixed cap. 5011 is less than the current without any changes. So there is a savings there because the increase is going up slower. But it's still much more of an increase than on the fixed 3% cap.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned a similar concern that I have about the number of years that the rolling average should be. Do you have any thoughts on what would be maybe a best practice? I mean, I've seen us do 10, that kind of maybe smooths things out because you have a longer, more years that you're using, so maybe that smooths it out. I've also seen us use 5 and 3 years. Didn't know if you had a view on what you think might be most appropriate. Thank you.
Senator, I don't think I can because the fixed cap of 3% is far superior for taxpayers than any number of rolling averages. An average is just, it kind of eases the pain, but when you're looking at, and some people are getting 15, 20% increase. So a 6-year, a 3-year, whatever, would minimize that a little bit, but you're still going to get a very large increase. So a fixed, predictable number is far better than any number of years, in my opinion.
Any other questions? Thank you, Dave. Committee, we do have proponent written testimony from Dave Rue. And next would be opponent Jim Benage. Welcome to the Tax Committee. Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, Madam Chair and senators on the committee, and happy St. Patrick's Day. So I am Jim Benage. I am the mayor of the city of Bel Air, which is the outskirts of Wichita suburb. So I'm opposed to this constitutional amendment because this will just be a shell game. It will have no effect on taxes as was previously proposed. So taxpayers at the end of the day would just feel like they've been lied to. Appraised values are a way to help determine the value of property as compared to other properties. It's not a tax itself. It's a way to equal the playing field, basically. The way we actually figure taxes is we set a budget. Say we say $5 million our budget. We go to the assessed value. We divide the assessed value by the budget. That gives a mill levy. That determines what the discrete property tax is on each individual. And it doesn't matter if the overall assessed value is raised 10% or 50% or lowered 10% or 50%. You're still going to come up with the same tax on that same $5 million budget. So this would do nothing to change taxes. It will only give people a feel good like they're actually getting something done, and it won't happen. So my written testimony explains that whole philosophy and how that works out. Gives you a little bit of a scenario to work through, and so that's basically the reason I'm opposed to it. I don't think we should be doing those kind of things. So if you want to read my written testimony, I appreciate that, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Committee questions. Senator Klemp.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your comments. I'm curious to your perspective on, do you feel that whether it's 5011 or 1603, your perception is it's still a shell game, it's shifting?
Yes.
My curiosity is, do you feel that the added transparency that shifts to the locals, because it gives, today there's what I would call a shell game to some degree, is the additional valuations drive additional revenue, so the locals get to take credit for that additional revenue that comes in as a result of the out of control valuations. With either of these, it shifts the spotlight, so to speak, onto the locals and the decision making that's happening at the local level. Do you see it that way, or I agree that they have to have mills to run the business, which is the local business. It puts you in full control, and there's more transparency as a result of either of these two options.
Well, I'm all in favor of transparency. I mean, that's one of the things revenue neutral rate did for us. That was a good thing about it. It was a little bit cumbersome the way it was implemented, but the idea, the concept is a good concept. So we always want to have good transparency. I'm trying to think. this won't change my budget. It won't, how do I don't look at my budget and say, well, you kind of back into it and look at your budget and say, well, what would the mill levy be? But the budget isn't based on the mill levy. The mill levy is based on the budget. It's the other way around. So, and in my example, in the written testimony, I show where that mill levy actually goes from 43 to 47.9 or something like that, because all you did was you lowered the assessed valuations, but the mill levy had to increase to get the same $5 million. You know, it's the $5 million that we're concerned about. And that's what you need to figure out, how you can hold the line on that and not continually increase that unnecessarily. I mean, you're going to have inflation, you're going to have growth of cities, so you got to look at those things as you look at your budget. But, you know, in Bel Air, we've reduced our, you know, because we actually looked at this stuff, we've reduced our mill levies at least a half point each year for the last several years. And we'll continue to do that whether this passes or not. We'll continue to do that whether the other bill that's up for discussion later on passes. That won't matter to us, because we're going to work to serve our citizens, provide the services they need, and keep the taxes at bay.
Madam Chair, one follow-on quickly.
Quickly. We're in short on time today.
Do you feel transparency curbs behavior, not for your wonderfully run area, but for maybe some other groups that may need some of that transparency to curb behavior?
Yes, it does. Yes, of course it does, because you say, oh, now my actions are being seen by others. We should always be honest enough to know that wouldn't be an effect, but, you know, we're all different people, so it always helps.
For being here today.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Schellenberger.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So you're a mayor, and this directly affects you.
Yes.
We hear every day that property taxes are the most hated tax there is. We're the legislature. We don't collect property tax. You do, you in schools. How would you fix this problem? Do you think the people are just complaining? You're the one collecting more.
The taxes,
us.
I understand. This is a local issue, really. What we do as a budget is a local issue. Our local people need to be saying, hey, you're doing the right thing or you're not doing the right thing. I don't see, I'm not saying there's no avenue, but I'm not seeing a good avenue for the legislature to get a handle on this. These are local issues. If you were opposing the property tax statewide, would you only have like a 1.5 mil statewide levy and a 20 mil school levy statewide? Other than that, you don't really do property taxes. So that's a local level, and we need to address that at the local level. That's the only way we can do it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's nice to
Thank you.
see you again.
Nice seeing you. Thank you.
Next up is neutral testimony from Leah. I'm not going to say it. Filter. Flighter. I did it again. I don't know why I keep inverting
Thank you, Madam
that.
Chair.
I
That's
know.
okay. That's all right. Happens a lot. Happens a lot. I'm Leah Flighter with the Kansas Association of School Boards. We're presenting neutral testimony, and I'd like to refer you to the end of my 2 pages of testimony. We do have some questions about fair market value and how that might be substantially different than the current set of standards. So that, just because that would obviously affect revenue raised, we would ask for some clarification there. We would also remind the committee that we do have legislative policy that any reduction in revenue for schools should be assured that it would be backfilled by the legislature, and that has been the practice, and we appreciate that, but obviously this is, something that would raise a concern with us. And we also would ask the committee to recall that we have a statewide $439 million shortfall in special education funding, and we are already backfilling that with property taxes from our SGF. So those are all issues that come to our mind when we examine this bill, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Leah. Committee, any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Aaron Popalka. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Aaron Popelk with the Kansas Livestock Association, and I'll be brief. We're testifying neutral today, not that we really have an issue with the constitutional amendment, but potentially an implementation process. And I don't want to rehash too much. I think the mayor did a good job of highlighting that when you look at the property taxes that are assessed, about 85% are at the local level. And so I think what we're concerned about is in the implementation stage, if we don't do this right, the concerns we had with 1603 could come true here and potentially shift things around. But I think if done right, if you look at the trailer bill, which I believe is 2394, it steps into a 6-year average. And I think if we do that, it slows any potential shift. And then you get to, I think, the value of the amendment, which is to get rid of the volatility in appraisals and give a little predictability around the appraisal process. But to be clear, at the end of the day, at the local level, this will not change the amount of taxes raised. As the mayor said, it's based on their budgets. The other issue I think we'd have, and again, we think this is probably appropriate. Agriculture has an 8-year moving average. And maybe that gets to the issue of having a trailer bill is to allow, because ag was through a trailer bill back in 85, to study what years, what process is the best. But one of the differences here between agriculture is that agriculture, we get an 8-year average, and so we live with the highs and then we live with the lows of the average. This allows the lesser of the actual appraisal or the average. And so there could be some potential for a shift, although residential typically doesn't go down very often, if at all. And so I think our concern there is pretty minimal. So again, I think the concern is when we do a trailer bill that we try and step into the average, so start with a 2-year, then a 3-year, then a 4-year, 5-year, and then build up to whatever the years to decrease any potential shifts. But with that, again, this, I think, adds some predictability on valuation, but at the end of the day, it really won't change at the local level the amount of taxes collected. So with that, happy to stand for questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Committee questions? So I have a couple. A statement you made was agriculture has an 8-year rolling average. That's not quite accurate. And you know that. We refer to it as the 8-year rolling average.
I was going for shorthand, but it is a average of averages.
It's an 8-year with a 2-year delay, so it totals a 16-year span to smooth out the highs and lows.
Correct.
Yes, and I do appreciate your testimony, and you said that you would delay the burden. So you were against 1603, and it's the same principle, same concept of limiting the taxable value. And so you're okay with it just so that it doesn't go in all at once, that it's a delayed implementation?
Correct. I think if you look at running some models, and during the House hearing, the chair had some of those where it showed how you could step into it over time. And so you wouldn't have that dramatic shift. And then at that point, we're really all using an average of some sort. And we get to, and I think the chair had in the House had, it's not a fiscal note, but some numbers run, and it kind of showed how that would work.
So thank you. My constituents would not be happy if we delayed this, and especially with the 66% increase in their residential valuations. But I appreciate your testimony. Any other questions, committee? Thank you very much.
For your time.
Thank you. Eric Stafford, welcome.
Morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Eric Stafford with the Kansas Chamber. I will be very quick and say the same stuff we said on 1603. Ultimately, our neutrality comes from concern over potential cost shifts onto other classifications of property outside of residential, such as commercial, and just kind of the unknown. But we do share your sentiment from the business community standpoint on the rising property tax burden, but just a lot of unknowns. So happy to answer any questions, but you can read our comments in our testimony.
Thank you, Eric. Seeing none, thanks.
Thanks.
Next is Mike, Commissioner from Leavenworth. Welcome back.
Good morning. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Senators, appreciate you allowing us to have this hearing and discuss property taxes again. I'm testifying neutral today. We've discussed among our 5 commissioners, and we did sign a letter, and our support is for SCR 1603, which is the cap. 26 states have a cap on property taxes. Kansas does not. If you tied a cap with something similar to Senate Bill 280, you have a 2-prong approach on dealing with property taxes. I think that's a great idea. So, however, if this piece of legislation, and I told Chairman Smith this, if this is the only thing, if this is the only train that's going to leave the station, then we would support this piece of legislation because we do believe it would break the spikes, because we get these spikes, yearly spikes. This would potentially smooth those out. One of the problems with it is it does not give a specific number of years on how many years you're going to establish this average. That could be problematic because we've seen a little trend. Like our evaluations in Leavenworth County this year are 5.4. If you go back 6 years of the 6-year average, we have those big, heavy COVID years that are higher. And they would be in the average, and they would be driving the average up. So this bill's also open-ended. We were a little scared of that because the legislature would be able to change the average at will. It's not set. So I think the business community and people want to have stability, to have a strong economy in Kansas. You build the stability into it. The 3% cap would be a piece of legislation that would allow us to go to the voters and very simply explain it. It's a 3% cap. We go to the voters with the 50-11, and it's some kind of a cap. We don't really have a number. There's a trailer bill that's been written, but that would depend on the next legislature. So those are some of the issues that we have, but I think the message from all 5, I'm speaking for myself, but we all agree on, is that there's a systemic problem with property taxes in Kansas. It's not something that can just be handled on the local level. It's something that needs to be changed in the statutes and the Constitution, because we've had this problem year after year after year. It's not going away. If we don't do something this year, this comes back, because this is what people are talking about. This is what's driving people out of their homes. And I can tell you, it's not wealthy people that are being driven out of their homes. It's the widows. It's the little ladies that they bought the home at a reasonable price, and now it's at an unreasonable price. They're being driven out of their homes. So appreciate the time. Thank you very much. And just do something about property taxes.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mike.
Thanks.
Committee, we do have a lot of written testimony, neutral. I'll draw your attention to that. And is there any other proponent? Any neutral? Any opponent? Seeing none, I'll close the hearing on House HCR 5011 and open the hearing on 2396. Thank you, Amelia.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, House Bill number 2396, as amended by House Committee, authorizes the use of a protest petition to limit funding of a taxing jurisdiction by property tax revenues above a certain amount. It establishes the Acknowledging Stewardship of Tax Revenue and Appropriations Fund, or ASTRA fund, and authorizes certain transfers from the State General Fund to qualifying cities and counties, and it eliminates the revenue neutral rate requirements by taxing subdivisions and the taxpayer notification cost fund that is related to that. To begin, the protest petition provisions in new section 1, it provides that all taxing jurisdictions except school districts in the state would be subject to a protest petition if the governing body adopted an appropriation or budget whereby the property tax revenues exceed the prior year's revenues plus a CPI adjustment, any revenue attributed to new construction, and any revenue dedicated to paying for bonds approved by a vote of the electors on or after July 1st of 2025. In the event that 10% or more of the voters of votes cast for the office of U.S. President from the prior election sign the protest petition, the taxing jurisdiction would be limited to property tax revenues equal to the prior year plus those three items, the CPI, the revenues attributable to new construction, and revenues dedicated to paying for those bonds. If the protest petition fails to garner the sufficient number of signatures, the taxing jurisdiction would be able to levy the property tax revenues they sought. Copies of the available protest petitions would be available in the county treasurer's office. And the protest petition provisions would not apply for any year in which the $60 million transfer that's provided in the next section is not made. So we'll go over that Astra Fund provision next. So the Astra Fund provisions are in new Section 2, and it provides a yearly transfer from the State General Fund of $60 million to the Astra Fund that is created in the bill. There would also be an increase in this transfer amount of 2% per year. Cities and counties in the state would be eligible for a disbursement from the fund if their budget does not exceed the tax revenues from the prior year, plus those three items, the CPI, revenue attributed to new construction, and revenue dedicated to paying for bonds. First, the state treasurer would calculate an apportionment for each county based on a formula that is provided. 65% of the amount distributed would be apportioned based on population figures, and 35% of the amount would be apportioned based on assessed tangible valuations. So that is for the portion that would be apportioned to the counties. Then, if eligible, the county and each city contained therein would receive a part of that apportionment based on the ratio of property taxes levied in the county and the property taxes levied by any cities within the county. Any amounts not transferred would be returned to the State General Fund. The fund shall only be used for services, including but not limited to roads and bridges, law enforcement, elections, public health and safety, and other services mandated by law. The state treasurer would also annually provide a list of the counties and cities that received a transfer from the fund, as well as those that did not, to the House Committee on Taxation and the Senate Committee on Assessment and Taxation. And then sections 3 through 5 and the repealer would remove and eliminate the existing provisions and requirements of the revenue neutral rate, and specifically KSA 79, 2988, and 2989 would be repealed. The bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book, and the bill passed the House on March 7th on a vote of 115-6. And I would be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. I don't see any. Oh, Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll try to be brief. On the Astra Fund, $60 million transferred, which grows. But if I understand this right, and that's the reason I'm asking the question, the tax revenue from a local entity would be collected, and then in their next fiscal year, if they held it neutral, we would give them money. Is that correct? In other words, it's not necessarily in the same fiscal year in which they. And if you don't know, we can ask a conferee.
We can ask a conferee, but I was looking at the actual language of the bill, and it appears to me that it is the $60 million transfer is made on July 15th. The Director of Property Valuations certifies to the state treasurer on or before November 15th for that year, the budgets that occurred during that year, whether the city or county's budget is equal to or less than this adjusted revenue number. So that would be that particular year still. Budgets are done August, September. This process would happen in the summer. And then on or before January 15th is when the treasurer would make the distributions to the eligible counties and cities. So it would still be, so the transfer would happen in July 15th. Or I guess the allocation or apportionment would happen in July. Well, I guess the transfer to the new Astra fund would happen in July. And then the actual distributions to the eligible cities and counties would happen in January. So they would happen within the same fiscal year.
Since this is statutory, not constitutional, it's subject to appropriation. So if the legislature considers himself broke, they can, notwithstanding, and not make the transfer. Is that correct?
I'm not an appropriations revisor. I will just note that there is a statement that it's a demand transfer, and so whatever those rules would apply.
Madam Chairman.
Thank you. And committee, any other questions? I think the conferees might be able to answer some of these, so thank you. Thank you, Amelia. Well, first up is Chairman Adam Smith. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is my first time ever testifying before Senate Tax, so thank you. I appreciate your efficiency with which you run your meeting, and I will try to be very brief and save as much time as you allow for questions and answers. I do better at conversation and question and answer than I do on just talking. I kind of organized my testimony, and you should have a copy of it, in the form of questions and answers that I've got about this. So I'll jump right into the elephant in the room. Why are we repealing the revenue neutral law? And quite simply, I'm just trying to make tax increases easier for the taxpayers to see and understand. If you look in my testimony, I do have attachment 1. I actually included my last year's copy of my revenue neutral statement. If you can find that. If you've ever looked at these things, there's a lot of really good information on here. This is basically like a property tax statement. It's parcel specific. It's very detailed. It's got a lot of good information, but it's sometimes a little difficult to understand. If you're looking at that, in that middle section, you have your actual revenue neutral rate. It lists all of your taxing subdivisions, or all of my taxing subdivisions, the revenue neutral rate, the taxes, and then down the bottom chart is the public hearing. I want you to take a look at the second row down there. It's USD 242 other. That's my local school, and that's your local option budget, your capital outlay funds. That's the first number that has over on that far right, you have 2024 maximum tax exceeding 2023 tax. The dollar amount is $113.45, and that represents a fairly substantial increase of 18.35%. So I'm going to want to go to that revenue neutral hearing. So I look down at the bottom chart and I find out date and time for the hearing. But then over there, it has the 2024 maximum tax exceeding tax at the revenue neutral rate. And that's a different number. I want you to ask yourself, which one of those is my actual tax increase, and why are those two numbers different? If you're familiar with looking at these, you know that the $113.45 is the actual tax increase that's being proposed, but why is $62.77 almost half of that? It's a little hard to understand. And then if you go, even more confusing is if you go down a couple of more lines, you look at the county, Wallace County. When I first look at these statements, I look for the biggest dollar amount, and that one is, on my statement, it's $225.89. That represents about a 12% increase. So I'm going to want to go to that revenue neutral hearing, but when I go down to the public hearing spot, it says no revenue neutral hearing is required. The fire district's the same, the township's the same. They all have about 11.25% to 12.5% increases, but there's no revenue neutral hearing required. How am I supposed to understand who's raising my taxes and who isn't? So what I'm trying to do is simplify this process. I love this statement. It gives a lot of detailed information, but it focuses on the revenue neutral rate, which is a mill levy. A lot of people don't understand. They might understand what the mill levy is, but they don't understand how it functions in accordance to their property tax statements. So something that I am proposing is to focus on the dollar amount of the tax increases. I didn't have time to put this in our bill before it came over from the House, but if you look, turn the page to attachment 2. This is kind of an idea I put together of a truth in taxation notice. We still have a notification. Like I said, it's not in the bill right now, but you can look at that and it focuses on the tax increases. You can immediately see who's raised taxes, who's kind of held the line, and who's actually even cut property taxes, or as far as their budget is concerned. The nice thing about this, it's not nearly as detailed as the revenue neutral notice, but it's very general, it's very broad. You could put this in the newspaper as a publication requirement. You could mass produce this and get this out to all the taxpayers very easily. I think something like this would be very, very easy for the common taxpayer to understand. Probably my biggest reason or motivation for repealing the revenue neutral law, though, is the fact that as the legislature, we don't hold ourselves accountable to the same standard. We have mill levies set in statute, the 20 mills for schools and the 1.5 mills for our building funds. We never touch those till this year. I mean, we've had some proposals before, and I know Senate Bill 35, we removed the 1.5. The House has a version 2011, I think is our House bill number, to try to peel down those mill levies. But we always point the finger at local governments when they hold the mill levy flat and say they didn't raise taxes, but we do the exact same thing. And until we can reduce those mill levies and try to hold ourselves revenue neutral, I just think it's unfair, and it sets a different precedent for us to expect the local governments to do that. And that's not limited to property tax either. I think Senator Schallenberger last week had the question about local government spending versus state spending. So I went back and I looked at the fiscal facts from legislative research. Over the last 10 years, our all funds budgets or actual expenditures have went from $14.4 billion to $25.4 billion. Again, that's all funds. That's a 76% increase over 10 years, average of 7.6 per year. SGF spending, State General Fund, has went from $6.23 billion to 9.97 billion, and I think this year we're looking at over $10 billion in our budget that we're talking about right now and debating. So this is well above the average annual inflation rate over the same time, which is 2.6%, and it's far over the revenue neutral rate. Speaking of inflation, if you'll turn the page to attachment 3, I did print off the last 25 years history of the CPI Midwest Regional Index. You'll see there that the 25-year average is actually 2.36%. The 10-year average, even with the last few years that we've had coming out of COVID with the high inflation rates, is still only 2.6%. And 13 out of 13 of those years, inflation was 2% or less. So I would say this: if you're looking to actually cap property tax increases at 3%, this is the bill you should be looking at. If you take the 2.36 or even the 2.6% average inflation, you add in the statewide average for growth and construction, which is roughly 0.5%, you're right there at that 3% number. I'll go ahead and start talking a little bit about the protest petition. In the interest of time, yes, I am. So I'll just jump in. Simply put, I was looking at I love having an election versus a protest petition, but it didn't take very long to look at that, and I realized the budget calendar and the election calendar for local governments simply don't match up very well. I've got a lot more comments in my written testimony, some of the downfalls of trying to do a primary or a general or a special election. I think I'll go ahead and just jump into the fact that the Demand Transfers Fund has got a lot of questions. The ASTRA Fund. First question I got on that one is, aren't we doing LAVTR all over again? We have actually 3 demand transfer programs. We repealed 2 of them: the City County Revenue Sharing Fund, the Special City County Highway Fund. Those all distributed money with no accountability. We just allocated the money when we did appropriate it, and the local governments got that funding. This is completely different. They have to keep their property taxes low before they get this money. And to address Senator Peck's question, you know, they adopt their budgets for that following year. So right now, local governments are starting to look at their budgets for their calendar year, fiscal year 26. When they're planning for that information, they will know how much money they could potentially get from this fund, and then they would receive that money January 15th for that following tax year, after they've, assuming that they've adopted their budget at or below that threshold. This would work. I had research run some numbers for me on Leavenworth County, and if you look at attachment 4, you can kind of see how this would work over time. The actual numbers for Leavenworth County, you can see in that first chart at the top there. 21 through 24, 21 was the base year for revenue neutral. Their valuation was roughly $823 million. Today, it's roughly $1.1 billion, and you can kind of see the increases, the taxes that they've levied, the increases, and the totals there. That second chart, second column, that shows under ASTRA, under House Bill 2396, if they had either voluntarily maintained their threshold limits or if a protest petition had been successful, you can see what the mill levy could have been versus 37.561 mill levy. Their mill levy would be 31.77, and that would represent, first year would have been about $1 million in savings. The second year would have been 3.9 million. And last year would have been about $6.4 million for a 3-year total savings of $11.3 million. The main reason I'm trying to propose this ASTRA fund, because we could do this, we've done tax lids historically throughout the state since 1908. I'm trying to do something different rather than the insanity of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. We've had tax lids in 1908, 1933, 1970. I list all of them in my testimony here. They work until we start putting in so many exclusions and exemptions from it for law enforcement, emergency services, things like that, to where they just aren't effective anymore. And my main intention with trying to propose this ASTRA fund or this incentive fund, and I never can predict, none of us can, what a future legislature is going to feel or see or do, but I really think it's going to be a lot harder for local governments to come back in and ask for exemptions if they are receiving this fund, if they have the eligibility for this fund. I'm just trying to do something different, trying to change the narrative here and hopefully get something that's going to be sustainable for the future. But with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also, I would check with your county clerk. I do know there was some software and some forms that were mailed with errors on them. So I would double check with your county clerk on the revenue neutral letter. Some of that information was inaccurate that went out in different counties. Senator Owens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know time is short and I've got 5 or 6 different questions. It's my understanding we're going to be meeting again over lunch.
So we are, but I don't know if you would be able to come back at noon. Yes, but we're going to finish with this conferee.
Okay. Well, okay, then I'll just jump right in and try to make it as brief as possible. Can you explain the difference between a standard protest petition process and the protest petition process that you are proposing in this legislation?
The biggest difference is the standard protest petition calls for an election. I didn't have time to build that kind of time frame, 30 days for the protest petition and then another 45 days for the election. I simply couldn't get that done. So what I tried to do was make the protest petition the actual deciding factor. If the protest petition is successful, it doesn't go to a vote of the people, it actually stops the tax increase. Another thing I did to try to make it more make it easier for people to sign on to the protest petition is we have a publicly held spot where people can go in and sign any petition that's eligible in their county at the county treasurer's office. That's never been done before. It's always up to individual circulators to carry the petition around, try to collect signatures, whether they're standing outside the grocery store or going to a basketball game or whatever. But I'm trying to make it as easy as possible. We also have it, it will be available online. Somebody can download that, print it off, sign it, and mail it in. It creates a lot of ease, hopefully, there to make the process a lot easier.
If I may, I'll do
Senator
one more
Owens.
and then see if anybody else has questions, because I don't want to own all of your time. Tell me why you exempted schools. They are such a large part
They
of
are.
the tax base.
They are, and I would love,
It feels like to me, sorry, that we're creating an exemption before this ever becomes law, which we know is the problem with a tax lid.
yes, Madam Chair, and I didn't mean to interrupt, I apologize, but the main reason I exempted schools and the state is because a lot of those things are set in statute. The 20 mills is set in statute. If we taxed for the 20 mills and then that was subject to protest petition, I'm not sure how that would work. A lot of also the voter approved mill levies for schools, and that merits another conversation, because a lot of times when the public votes to exceed their LOB, their local option budget, they are approving a mill levy rather than a dollar amount. And as valuations go up, if you hold that mill levy flat, it increases taxes, as I mentioned earlier. So I think we maybe need to take a look at the way we look at the mill levies for schools, maybe approve dollar amounts rather than the mill levies, because I don't think a lot of people, when they vote to exceed those or increase those mill levies, they don't understand what they're really tying everybody to in the future. It's a long time tax increase.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Representative Smith, I agree 100% that the legislature spending has been ridiculous over the last 10 years, the growth. Also, I would be 100% supportive of our mill levy, our 20 mills, being revenue neutral, so it would continue to drop as valuations went up. However, the question, on attachment 4, I may not be understanding what you've got here, Representative, but you say the savings, 3 years of 11.3 million, and then Astra would provide them with 4 million. If I'm seeing this correctly, I don't see how a 4 million appropriation is going to cause them to say, well, we're not going with this $11 million increase.
Right, and the Astra Fund is not intended to make them whole, but depending on whatever increases they would be proposing. That 11.3 million was the cumulative total of the 3 years. If you look over there at the taxes levied, you can see how the limit, the percent increase on the next column there is the inflation plus the growth, and that is what limits their budgets. So rather than having an $11.5 million growth over the last 3 years in their taxes that were levied, they would be limited to the $5 million in growth. Add the $4 million onto that, and that's where you can kind of see a little bit of a buffer. It's not going to make them whole. It's not intended to offset, double-digit increases. It's just provided as an incentive to hopefully help the local governments kind of plan financially a little bit better long-term. And yeah, there's a lot of local governments that fund is probably not enough incentive to do that.
Sort of what I was trying to ascertain is, okay, yeah, I agree. I'm not confident that it's going to incentivize.
Pretty small carrot.
Small carrot. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Senator Klemp.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your comments. I feel over the last couple of weeks, Leavenworth's getting picked on a little bit. However, I would say that it is a wonderful petri dish to take a look at Leavenworth, as over 50% of the base doesn't participate in property tax. So because of the entities that reside there, it creates a unique moment. And I think Leavenworth is probably not the best example, but it is a good example of how they're spending. Some of the things you mentioned that were positives is keeping it simple. I do like the cash, the way you look at it from a cash perspective. I think shifting the ownership over onto the voters or the people, we should probably take a look. That's probably not, I feel like there's an opportunity there, and shifting that over to them and the burden on that is a little bit of a challenge. So I just wanted more of a comment than anything, but I appreciate all of the data, and we've seen a lot of it going back and forth. And then on the CPI, seems like it's a pretty simple process to get to that 3% cap anyway. You kind of get there, but there's a few other aspects that might be a little challenging, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to the burden it places on the taxpayer with the protest petition. I want to point out the fact that that's what revenue neutral does right now. I mean, you have to go in and, with an election, the burden is on the government to do something. With revenue neutral or with a protest petition, the burden is on the taxpayer to do something. And I would point out that on my revenue neutral notification, for me personally, if all of those entities are exceeding revenue neutral, I'm going to have to go to the school, I'm going to have to go to the courthouse in Sharon Springs, the Weskin Township Hall, the firehouse. That's what we call our fire station in rural areas. It's basically a barn. But I'm also going to have to go to Colby, which is an hour and a half away, for the library revenue neutral hearing. I'm going to have to go to Goodland for the Extension District revenue neutral hearing. The burden's already on me under current law to get to all these places. And if I can't make it at the appointed date and time that they're having the hearing, I'm out of luck. With a protest petition, you can go into one place, the county treasurer's office, and you can sign every single protest petition that you are eligible for, one-stop shop, and you've got 30 days to do it.
So we are out of time, literally. And I would just say you got a few commissioners in here. They're hearing from people before the revenue neutral meeting. They know. They're not waiting until that hearing. But I do appreciate your testimony. If you do want to come back at noon, we would start up with you.
I'd be happy to. I don't think we're debating some stuff on the floor, but I might have to run back down for a vote. But are you back in this room, or?
No, we are going to continue this hearing at room 159 at noon, sharply at noon, because we need to finish today on this hearing. And we do have some work to do before the committee. Thank you very much. So
Thank you. I apologize for taking up the.
No, that's okay, and we will hear from other conferees. We want to leave them time too. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Any other business to be brought before the committee? So committee, we will have lunch for you, room 159 at noon. Thank you very much for your work today.